Some people have a knack for being in the right place at the right time. John McClane has a knack for being in the wrong place at the right time.
McClane?
Don't try to stop me, Al.
I was just gonna wish you luck.
The reason why we made Die Hard, we already had a relationship with 20th Century Fox. And we were talking to them about the various licenses they had and what projects we could work on. And we came to the conclusion that Die Hard was something that really excited us. We're huge fans of the film. The game already existed on previous Die Hard films that did very well. But we just love the film, and we think even though it's a 14-year-old franchise potentially, it's something that people always know. They still use the one-liners from the film. Everybody remembers the films. It's a classic. If you are a hardcore gamer, there's enough in here that's new controls, new scenarios, new puzzles, new ideas of gameplay that will keep you entertained and give you something different from a lot of games out there.
We wanted to have a very strong lead character for the player to relate to and associate with. And we were working with our publisher, who's 20th Century Fox, and they obviously had numerous licenses available to them. And one of them was Die Hard. Now, Die Hard is, to everyone, one of the all-time classic action films. It's one of the films that, even though it came out at 88, it's 20 years old or 15 years old, it actually hasn't dated. If you look at it tomorrow, it's got everything you want from an action film. Great set pieces, fantastic tension, brilliant dialogue, but also it's got one of the all-time classic heroes or anti-heroes in John McClane. And that was a very exciting character for us to try and translate into a video game. You get an attitude, you get someone who you can relate to. He's not Superman. He's not some character who can take out an army on his own. He's an everyday man who's a bit grumpy, a bit pissed off, which again makes him more human, but also is very determined. And the challenge for us was to translate that into a video game. When we began making Die Hard Vendetta, the first thing we concentrated on was the story that the game was going to tell. It was very important to us to do the other films justice, as you get a certain expectation when you're told you're going to be playing a Die Hard game or you're going to see a Die Hard film. And we wanted to make sure that we lived up to those expectations. So we started focusing on what the story for Die Hard Vendetta would be. With the Die Hard films, there are certain things you'll get with them with regards to snappy dialogue, big set pieces, plot twists, and we wanted to incorporate all of these things into the story for the game. With that, we wanted to allow the player to be able to do things that you hadn't been able to do before. First and foremost, you run around and you shoot things as is standard. But with the character of John McClane, we realised that a lot of what he does is creeping around. It's not just going in guns blazing. One of the first things we realised was we wanted to put in a stealth mode, which allowed the player to creep up on terrorist mercenaries. So we introduced the stealth mechanic, which meant that you'd move around slowly, but you had a better chance of avoiding confrontation as opposed to every time coming in and having to shoot your way out of problems. Another thing that we wanted to do with the player was allow them the ability to interact with the world more than had been achieved before. And either that would be through talking to other characters in the world, in the game world. One of the mechanics we've got is physically grabbing another person in the world. And that opened up a whole area of gameplay mechanics that hadn't been tapped into before. If he grabs the correct person, he can disarm a whole group of mercenaries. By taking out the commander, there's a chain of hierarchy, chain of command, and his henchmen will stand down. So this, coupled with the stealth aspect of the game, meant that the player had an alternative approach to dealing with all of these situations. We wanted to allow the player to have more flexibility in what they chose to do. One aspect of that was allowing the player to jump around as opposed to constantly being tied to the ground. One of the mechanics problems that you have with that is if you're jumping, you don't want to constantly having to look at your feet and see where the edge is before you perform a jump, because that's actually very frustrating for the player. So what we did was we came up with the mechanic of an auto jump, where if you ran at an edge, McClane would automatically leap. You want to keep the game flowing for the player, and the enjoyment comes out of making the jump as opposed to being in the right place to perform the jump. So again, it freed up the player to perform new actions in first person. The benefits of working in video games is we can actually create and model things that you can't really do in real life. Or if you were to do them in real life, it would cost millions and millions of pounds. So for instance, what you expect from a Die Hard film is large explosions, buildings being destroyed. We had a lot of fun in being able to do that because we could create these set pieces of mass destruction at a fraction of the cost to actually doing them in real life. And what is great for the player's point of view is they can cause this destruction, but they don't have to pay for it. Once we had the design in place and we knew the gameplay elements that we wanted to cover, we then had to obviously look and, well, how do we go about building this? The direction we took was we spend a lot of effort working on the tools that we would use to build the world. What that meant was that we decided to build our own tool to allow us the flexibility to try different things out, because a lot of the things we've done in Die Hard Vendetta hadn't been done before. So we developed a tool which allowed our level builders flexibility to build the worlds and the environments from the concept art that the art department had produced, but then actually play sections of the game within the tool. So yeah, we spent a lot of time and effort in creating the tool to allow us to translate the paper design into a 3D world and play the game within the tool. And from that, we had the flexibility to see very quickly whether or not the space was right, or whether it was the puzzles were working, the mechanics of it was working. And it allowed us the opportunity to change things very quickly and fine-tune things to a degree. If we didn't have our own tool, we wouldn't have been able to do. While I'm in here, I can play the general mechanics from what people will recognize as the start of the subway location. Now what we can also do, because I'm running this within the editor, is I can take the camera away from where the player is and go and look at another specific point. Say back here, look at this guy taking his trial. I can create a new view of that, just expand that out. I can keep doing this and then return back to the player's perspective. You'll see another version of McClane that's just looking after the points back there. And we can test out various scenarios and see if the reactions are what we'd expect, you know, position-wise. Various things we can do. We can slow down time. We can step through a frame at a time and just make sure that animations play smoothly, that sound effects and events are triggering at the correct time. We can also get a number of debug information as well out for the programmers, just to make sure that everything is behaving as it should be. The sound department would be creating the sound effects for the weapons. One of the directions we wanted to do was go for quite a realistic style, because obviously the films are based in a real world. So a lot of research was done on gun sound effects, weapons, explosions, these kind of things. And all these assets would be brought together within the tool to then see the paper design translated into a playable game. One of the things that these generation of consoles allow us to do, which we could never do before as games developers, is flesh out our characters a lot more than was previously possible. In Die Hard Vendetta, one of the ways we did that was by introducing a lot of dialogue to the characters. We wanted it so that if you went to speak to somebody, you'd get a reaction. But if you went to speak to them again, you'd get a different reply, and again, a different reply. And in doing that, in creating this dialogue, we actually gave these characters personality. Some of which will be very rude to you when you talk to them. Some of them will be very helpful. Some of them, I think, will make you laugh when you get a sarky reply back.
What was that you said? Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker?
From developing the personalities through the dialogue, the art department could start to then paint the people. And they created the 3D models from the personality that was gained from the dialogue.
From the design documents, there was a brief description of the characters, 1 or 2 lines, maybe a bit about their background, a little bit about what kind of work they do, whether these guys are bad guys or good guys. So from those few lines, I would go away, look at inspiration from movies, comics, and most importantly, real life. I actually went around the office taking photographs of certain people that I felt had features that could be used to my advantage. For example, they might have an interesting nose or chin or forehead. I would go away, sketch out ideas, and give this guy a personality. If he was evil, I'd make his face seem dark, give shadows under his eyes, certain features I'd make more pronounced. From that, I would take those images into Photoshop and then manipulate the image. This image now has to be mapped onto a 3D object. This comprises of 2 parts. There's a 3D mesh, and then there's the 2D textures that gets applied to the mesh. The 2D textures is pretty much like painting, as you do in oils or acrylics. And the 3D mesh is like building something from material like wood. Once the texture was on the 3D mesh then had to have a skeleton, because without a skeleton it can't move. So once the skeleton is applied to the 3D mesh, then we can actually run the animations through the mesh and bring the character to life. One of the key challenges for Die Hard Vendetta was actually the sheer amount of characters that needed to be created. There's something like 130 unique characters in the game. The challenge was to make these characters as interesting and as memorable as possible. This is one of the characters in the game. Now, he's a prisoner that you talk to, so his facial textures have to be of a high standard. So once he blinks, you go up to the character, you walk around him, his eyes will track you, looking left and also looking right. So once we've got the eyes looking left and right, we've got them blinking, then secondly is that we'd like to talk to him. So we've got the jaw flap and you can start talking. This works with the sound file. Once the sound file is played through the engine, the character will start talking and he'll talk like this. Now, that's pretty blank. If he's saying something angry, we'd like to get some facial features in there. So there we go. So we'd tint in his eyebrows, we'd give him a little bit of a grimace, and then we'd have him talking like this, almost like he's growling or he's shouting. If he's a pleasant character, which he could well be, we would give him a smile. And then if we wanted to make him talk, we'd take a little bit of the smile off and then have him talk like this. So there's 2 emotions. We've got him angry, but then we've also got him happy if we wanted him to be happy. Previous to this generation of consoles, the resolution of textures and the number of polygons was really restrictive. You would draw a character, you would get all the detail in that you think was needed, and then you'd come to the computer and the character was half of what you wanted it to be. What we can do now is the drawing that I draw and the image that I have in my head, I can actually recreate that almost down to the finest details, which just was not achievable on the previous consoles.
McClane, you are quite an irritating man and very hard to kill.
We wanted to add realism with regards to the dialogue and the speech you saw. We wanted to make the models look as realistic as possible and as detailed as possible, because we could with this technology. So the next thing was to look at the motion of them. We wanted them to move in a realistic way. And the way you get the most realistic motion is using motion capture. This is Bits' motion capture studio. And in here we capture the animations that we used in Die Hard Vendetta. The system we use is a magnetic system. We've got 2 boxes, one here and one here. And what that does is it will track sensors on our actor's body for the various joints around their limbs. It's all been finely calibrated. There's like markings on the floor, so all the distances and stuff can be translated into the video game. So the space here fits the space in the game. One of the reasons that we decided to go for a magnetic system is that it gives us instant feedback from the motion the actor's performing to us seeing it on a model within the computer. So in the development of Die Hard Vendetta, there was times when we decided that we wanted to change a scenario. We had the ability to come in here, create the animation, and within half an hour have it playing within the game engine. This allowed us a lot of flexibility in fine-tuning the set pieces. We brought in a stuntman who could actually perform many rolls and tumbles and was trained in the use of the weapons to give us the most realistic animations we could achieve. Unfortunately, we couldn't use metal weapons because it would have affected the magnetic sensors. So we created a full batch of wooden M16s, pump-action shotguns, and numerous wooden props to allow them to perform the actions.
In Die Hard Vendetta, you basically have three types of music. You have a atmospheric, scary type, you have a stab, and you have a general action music. Stabs basically correspond to very short instances of music that are either one note or a series of notes over a 20-second interval. This particular example here is when John McClane has set off the explosives and is trying to exit the observatory. The explosives are timed exactly to when the music climaxes. So here we go. Now the music gradually gets a bit more intense. As you can hear, the drums coming in now. And she's ready to blow. Now, hopefully, if you were successful, you'd be living through this and you'd be able to hear the tail end of the music. Otherwise, if you would have ran out too soon, you'd have been dead. The score to compose took about 6 to 8 months. It took some time to actually get the ideas in my head. So it gradually got faster as we got towards the end of the project. And when you start getting into detail where some themes are associated with some characters and situations, and it starts to get quite intense and dense. I mean, I had to write about 67 pieces of music throughout the entire thing, variations of this theme, variations from that theme. It was very difficult. It was probably the most challenging orchestral thing I ever did. In one level, we may have up to, it's hard to tell, 30, 40 different people, different voices, different looks, different everything. We try to keep things as realistic as possible.
One of the people we used in the game was Reginald VelJohnson, who is the actor who played Sergeant Al in the films, and we were really fortunate to get him because immediately you have the familiarity again and the connection with the films. In creating the sound effects that was required for the game, our sound engineer would research from numerous libraries specific gunshot sounds and explosion sounds, real-world sounds. At the same point, he would improvise a lot of sound effects.
I really wanted to add drama, mainly. Drama, and I wanted to shake the player.
Ah! My eyes!
It ties in with the movies quite nicely because the movies are very orchestral and very big and spectacular, monumental. And so I tried to do that with the music. I tried to get away from a repetitive nature of video games.
It's quite a big undertaking in producing a video game on this scale. We had 5 programmers working on just general mechanics. We had 4 3D modelers making meshes for the worlds, 4 level builders actually building the environments. We had a specific programmer working on audio, a specific programmer just working on AI. So the actual production teams grew quite significantly because of the scope of the game.
We had a big team already here. I mean, we had, I think, probably around 10 or 11 people already internally. That included writers, designers. Fox had a producer, exec producer, and I think a writer as well. They brought it onto the scene for a little while. So, but most of it was done in our offices in London with the feedback from Fox.
The development time for Vendetta was now approaching 2 years from the start of the story to finalising the game, which is, again, when you compare it to motion pictures, video games now are becoming equivalent to the production values and production times as you see with movies. But the one thing that we do have with video games is you can interact with the world. You play the story, and the key thing that we really wanted to get across was that you felt you were in a Die Hard film and you were playing John McClane, but you could do things that you could never get to do in the cinema. You could actually go up and take a guy out. You could outrun a fireball. You could do all these things. We wanted the player to feel that sensation. I think that's the one thing that we've succeeded more so than on any aspect that we first started off, was making the player believe that they were John McClane.
One of the big decisions we had in the development of the game was whether the game should be mature. A lot of people don't realize the original films were mature films, 18 films. Obviously there was mature dialogue, some mature content. It took a lot of convincing to convince the people around us that that's the way to go. We felt to be true to the license, you had to do that. And the feedback we're getting from forums, potential customers, Die Hard fans, you can't make a Die Hard game and be true to it without being mature. So it was a big step that the decision was made probably at the beginning of this year, 2002. But it was definitely the right decision. I think it's a better game for it. It's more Die Hard for it. And I think everybody now looks back and is happy that it was definitely the right decision. It's always a great feeling when you worked on a project for a number of years to know all the efforts come through, it's on the shelves, and hopefully people enjoying it. And we hope, you know, you're watching this video that you're enjoying our game.
Now, I'm really excited. I think people are really going to enjoy this game. I think they're going to laugh in places. I think they're going to go cool in places. They're going to be able to see things which they've never really done before in a first-person shooter.
It's taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of TLC, but I think you'll like where we've ended up.
A lot of care and attention has gone into this game to make it a Die Hard game like none other that's gone before.